Yeah, actually, you should ask. Joyce, do you want to come up? Jeremy? Or Jeremy? Jeremy, do you want to come up to the panel? That would be great.
Sure.
And we'll maybe grab
Another chair. Okay, we have a panel of 3 individuals who are going to talk on youth homelessness and housing precariousness, which is the 2 focuses of the report card this year. So first of all, Christine Vandenberg from Youth Services, Nelson Community Services. Laura Kelridge, Employment Counselor, Nelson and District Youth Center. And Jeremy Kelly, who is a street outreach worker. One of the street outreach workers. And I'm not sure, have you talked together about which one would like to go first, or should I just start at the top of the list? And
It doesn't really matter.
Inspired.
No, we hadn't inspired.
okay, we'll start with Christine.
Sure. You can pass the mic around to
Would you, if you'd like to sit
No,
down?
sure.
I think it's
No,
wired
it's
in.
wired in, so he can.
It's wired in?
Let's not
Yeah.
break things.
We could.
We could try. It's a little low. Sure, thanks. Thank you, perfect. That's great. Thanks for having me. I was so pleased to have to hear that the PIT count was focusing on youth homelessness. I've been working for Nelson Community Services for a long time, and this issue continues to grow in our community, so just really pleased to be here. I'll share a little bit about Cicada Place and then just touch on a few highlights of where I think some direction from the PIT count could possibly come. So Cicada Place is a unique opportunity for youth ages 16 to 22 to live independently in a supportive environment. We have 10 furnished apartments, and the furnished part is really important because when youth are moving out on their own, getting those big items like a bed, a comfortable bed to sleep in, to have a beautiful kitchen table and chairs, to have a home that feels very home-like is such an important part of creating an environment that they want to be in. We recognize that the transition from adolescence to adulthood can be really challenging, and the staff at Cicada Place are available to support youth and guide them through this really challenging time in their lives. So we offer individual and group life skills support. We bridge to community services. We connect to educational programs. We have lots of connections with LVR, with the REACH program, lots of connections right now with Selkirk College, which is amazing. We do crisis intervention. We help navigate through the complicated ministry systems of income assistance and ministry for children and families. And we do life skill support so they can learn how to manage a household, how to do your taxes, how to cook a really healthy meal, how to make connections in community. Since opening our doors, which is 19 years ago now, we've had nearly 200 youth and close to 40 dependent children live at Cicada Place. And as Dylan, thank you. And a big thank you to Joyce Donswiffen, who's the manager, who this was her innovative idea. So without that innovation, Cicada Place wouldn't exist. So as Dylan touched on, youth homelessness, it's really hidden. It's youth that are going couch to couch, not knowing where their next meal, where their next bed is going to be. And at a young age, knowing that that's what the young person has to think about doesn't feel okay. As a community, it doesn't feel okay that an 18-year-old that should be thinking about their math homework or their new job is thinking about things that are basic life skills or basic life needs, like where their meal is or where their next bed is. So again, I wasn't surprised by the statistics hearing that a huge portion of people surveyed, I think it was 56%, are homeless at a very young age. So that entry into homelessness and entry into having a life of perpetual homelessness can start at a very young age. So it's so critical that we have programs like Cicada Place, like outreach workers, that can connect with youth where they're at to really support youth to get the services they need so that they don't become, the 18-year-old, the 38-year-old that's continuing to struggle for a large portion of their lives with homelessness. A big reason why youth really struggle with homelessness as well is because they cannot compete in this competitive rental market. There's very few landlords that want to rent to young people, so just their age alone is a barrier to entry into the rental market. I know when I first was renting, I grew up in Nelson, and 20 years ago, I went into a realtor's office. They had a list of places. I picked the place. I moved in. That's not the case anymore. So again, those barriers to entry into the rental market are huge for young people. They lack references. They have low income. So again, the statistics of 93% of people saying that rents are too high, they can't afford rent, is a huge barrier for a young person. So again, making those partners in supporting youth such a critical part of our community, and why creating more affordable housing, more supported housing is such an important part. We have a huge and mounting wait list at Cicada Place. And so again, that speaks to the need for creating more supportive housing for young people. And again, as Dylan touched on, we don't have any emergency housing for anyone under the age of 19, which is a huge gap. I'm really honored to be part of such an innovative program, because I get to see every day how having a home for a young person can be absolutely life-changing. So I'll just end sharing a quote from one of the kids from Cicada. With a place to live, I have one less thing to worry about in my stressful life. If all else fails, I have Cicada Place and the people there who care and support me. It's so nice to have a comfortable and safe space to call home, to start to build my own life and independence. I get teary thinking about that.
Thank you, Christine. Laura Claridge is the Youth Services and Housing Manager at Nelson. Hold on, sorry. Sorry, Laura, I'm reading the wrong line. Is the Employment Counselor, Nelson and District Youth Center. Thank you. It's Claridge, right?
Claridge. So it's up and down. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me here today. I'm Laura, and I'm an employment counselor over at the Nelson Youth Employment Center. And so the Employment Center provides the whole life cycle of employment and career-related services for youth 23 and under. My work particularly focuses on youth with higher barriers to employment. And in our city, one of those barriers is frequently homelessness, or more often with our youth, precarious housing. For me, reading the data related to youth from the PIT count was really elucidating in providing a context for many of the stories that I hear every day from my clients and that my colleagues hear from their clients. Many of the youth that we surveyed didn't identify at all with the label of being homeless. In fact, they were quite clear, no, I do not consider myself homeless. But when we talked a little bit about what precarious housing meant, the situation was quite the opposite. In fact, one youth went so far as to tell me that this was really the norm for her and her peers. Many of them are relying on their friend network, on their personal network outside of their families for a place to stay, whether that's for a night, for a week, for a month, before they move on to the next person in that network. And what I've also seen happen with some of our youth is a kind of domino effect in this reliance on friends, in that often these housing situations that are precarious for the youth that I'm speaking to are also precarious for the youth that they're staying with, the one that they're relying on, the couch that they're sleeping on. In that housing situation may itself be provisional, or that other peer that they're relying on may also have a situation of unstable or precarious employment that may or may not continue. The main reason that I hear frequently for youth losing their housing is conflict with parents or guardians. And sometimes this means that a youth is suddenly told, you've got to get out of here within a couple months. Sometimes it means that the parent or guardian is withdrawing support for basic needs like food, or in the case of our youth who live in rural locations, transportation, which then becomes a major obstacle for the youth to get the basic services that they need. And in some cases, it means that the youth has had for some time an unsupportive or an uncomfortable or an unsafe home environment, and they've been precariously housed for a number of years without really being able to articulate that that's what's happening. They're staying on couches of friends, and that's kind of been the pattern for a long time, to be away from home as much as possible. And often they come through our doors and they've internalized the message that if they can just get a job, they can sort of resolve all of these other issues. And sometimes that presents its own obstacle in that often our youth who aren't stably housed are not really ready for stable full-time employment, particularly in that, that young age between 16 and 22, the age that I work with. Sometimes this means that they're spending a lot of time on a day-to-day basis trying to figure out where they're going to sleep that night, where they're going to get food. Sometimes it means that there are hygiene challenges in figuring out how to be clean and well-dressed and have their clothes washed in order to present well to employers who might hire them. Sometimes it means that there's communication issues in not having a phone or stable access to email to be able to respond promptly to employers when they get interview requests. And sometimes it means not having a permanent address to put on a payroll form when they are actually employed, and having barriers around disclosing that to employers and having employers kind of understand the situation and be empathetic about it. And so one thing that we've discovered, at least with youth, is that stable housing really is a prerequisite for stable, long-term employment. But I also want to talk a little bit about successes today, because we have seen many youth who come through our doors who, through receiving support from not only us, but from many other organizations, many people who are here today, are able to move out of these precarious housing situations and into something more sustainable, and ideally into careers that are meaningful for them. So I'm going to tell a little story about a client whose name and some of her details are changed to protect her privacy, but who I think elucidates a lot of the positives that can come out of community partnerships. So this client, I'll call her Amanda. She lived in a very rural location in a situation that had been pretty unstable for a long time. Had parents who really didn't want her to be there, shouldn't feel safe or comfortable there. And had been couch surfing for a number of years, trying to stay away from home as much as possible. And she had a number of other barriers as well when she came to us. And in order for her even to have arrived in our offices and to be able to make an appointment, she had already accessed some services for transportation supports to get her there. So even before I met her, there were other community partners involved. And through our time together, she accessed a lot of services through us, and we referred her to a lot of services in the community, including counseling services, including I went with her to the Women's Center to access the clothing store to get interview clothes. We did a lot of life skills training and job search training. She accessed some certifications through us, through Selkirk. She did an intake with Cicada Place and got on the wait list there. She visited the food bank when her family withdrew support for food. And eventually, when she was ready, we started job development services to find a suitable employer for her. And initially, that looked like one shift a week, where she could work with this really great employer we found in a field that she was interested in. She did well, had some job coaching with us to make sure that she was developing the skills that she needed to keep that job. She did really well, saved a little bit of money, and was able to find a more stable housing situation, something that was still temporary, but away from the initial situation that she was in. And then she was able to get a second job on top of that, building on the first, got a little bit more income under her belt. And then she was able to start looking for even more sustainable housing. And so I think what her story suggests to me is this alignment between stable housing needing to match the stability of employment. And I think what we see is not these giant leaps of suddenly finding this great full-time job and then all of the other sort of barriers resolving immediately, but these kind of incremental steps where if we can make housing a little more sustainable and stable, then that creates a platform where we can find more stable and sustainable employment. And so you can see that as part of her story, it's not a story about the Nelson Youth Employment Center. It's very much a story about a whole community coming together and finding a way for this client to access the support she needed from various organizations that had the relevant supports to launch her into a life that hopefully fulfills her goals of being independent. And so I think often in employment services, we use the handshake as this great metaphor for success, for finally creating that connection between job seeker and employer. But I think in reality, the metaphor, at least for our clients, looks a little bit more like this, in that we often have many different partnerships that come together to help our youth attain independence and stable housing and sustainable and hopefully meaningful employment. Thanks.
Thanks, Laura, for that inspiring story, and I really like the emphasis on collaboration. It's neat. And our final panel member is Jeremy Kelly, and Jeremy is a street outreach and housing transition worker. He's got 2 jobs.
Thanks, Phyllis. So yeah, my name's Jeremy Kelly. I'm a transitional support worker with Nelson Cares and the Nelson Street Outreach. I vaguely remember telling Anne that I would sit on the committee. I don't actually remember saying I would prepare anything. And then I was looking at the agenda, and it says Joyce Dalms or Jeremy Kelly. So I've effectively been thrown under the bus by Joyce. So thank you. So a little snapshot of what I do is I work very closely with Stepping Stones, which is Nelson Cares, the homeless shelter. So what I will do is I get a referral into my little box. I'll take that referral. They'll outline the person needs help with finances, housing, mental health supports, and things along that line. So then I'm like, okay, so you need help getting a Pt.2 application. So these are like beastly applications. That's persons with disabilities. So I'll get them an appointment with Grace Nicano, and she'll fill out the medical section, and then Ryle or myself will sit down and help them fill out how their disability affects them on the day-to-day basis. And then there's 3 sections, and then we'll send that off to the ministry, and hopefully that'll bump their income up from the regular $375 and $375 for shelter up to $1,400 with a PWD. So most of the clients I'm dealing with have $375 to live on for a month, $375 for shelter, and then another thing that Ryle and I, as the other street outreach worker, we can offer is the HOP program, and we can offer them a $120 a month rent supplement for 12 months, or 1 supplement a year for 12 years. Work it out how you want. And that actually makes a vast difference for these people, because then they can actually, they're like, okay, if I got $375 and then another $120, that's close to almost $5, and then I can bump it up, and then I can move a little bit more money over, and it gets people a little bit closer to the actual regular housing market. It is a huge struggle for my clients, as you probably know. So if you go on to I Love Nelson, there's more cute Aussie couples on there that are looking for housing that can afford $1,400 a month. So are you going to rent to the cute Aussie couple that can afford $1,400 a month? Or are you going to rent to the person who doesn't have any references, is living in a transitional shelter, maybe with a mental health concern or a drug addiction? My clients do not present well in the general market. So that's where we really struggle. So that's where Ward Street Place really helps. So I work with Ward Street Place really closely. That's where my office is. And so Ward Street Place, I'll put people on a temporary, it's called a TAP program. So they'll come in, I'll sit down with them, and we'll address goals where they want to, they need to. I actually just took a guy, anecdotally, I just took him down to the mall. We wrote an apology letter to Save On Foods and to the mall security guards, because he had a bunch of interactions with them. And, I brought him down to the mall, and he shook hands with the manager at Save On Foods, and he handed over the letter, and the guy was like, okay, I'll take this to the team. I really appreciate you trying to make amends. And he's one of our success stories. He's been housed for almost going on 3 months after 4 years of homelessness. And I know all of you guys would recognize him because he's a very visual member of the downtown panhandling individual. So yeah, I work very closely with him. At least once a week we meet, and I give him grocery cards, and I help him with budgeting, and I basically help him transition, hopefully get him into the residential tenancy agreement so he's off the TAP program. So that's transition support work. Then Ryle and I on Nelson Street Outreach, we address people's basic needs, day-to-day needs. Usually it starts with a conversation, a kind word, a pair of socks, harm reduction supplies, and then if they've got a drug and alcohol problem and they want to seek treatment, we can do treatment referrals almost same day, which is pretty incredible, because the other people in town, I'm not going to mention them by name, they do treatment referrals, but you need to get an intake appointment, which takes about a week. And then you see a counselor, and that takes about another week, and then you've got another week and a half before your referral goes in. So you're looking at 6 weeks before the treatment referral goes in, and it can be up to 3 months or 3 weeks, 4 weeks before you get into treatment. So with the homeless population, if they want to go to treatment, they want to go yesterday. So that's where we're really lucky that we can do same-day referrals, and usually it takes about another 3 weeks to get in. And then a lot of it, we help people, we transport people to job interviews, housing interviews. We do PWD applications, we do treatment referrals, we do detox referrals. We get a lot of people into Castlegar detox and Kamloops detox. We do a soccer program, which has got a bit of attraction, not so much. We just finished a pool time, $2 toonie pool time on Tuesdays, where Ryle, our volunteer, will stay at the pool and pay everybody's entry fee into the pool, and they can get a wristband and they can come out throughout the day. We work very closely with the beat cop, Sean, who's been a great help. Oftentimes we'll be texting first thing in the morning. He's like, hey, this is who I'm looking for. It's not serious. Just get them to call me, or vice versa. And we've got a great working relationship. One of my favorite things about the position I'm in is the working relationship I've built with service providers. We go up to the hospital, they see us coming, they swipe us in, they're like, he's in the back room. You know, we go to the ministry office, and when we're advocating for people at the ministry office, it's incredible on both sides of the glass. Our clients and the ministry workers, it's all of a sudden everybody's down here. You know, when the clients are coming in, everybody's acting up here, and when we're there, it seems to just, everybody's a lot calmer because they know they've got an advocate and somebody's on their side. Mental health is great. We work really closely with them. The urgent response nurse, I work really closely with her. So yeah, again, it's service providers, and I really enjoy my job. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Jeremy. You do a wonderful job for being not prepared. We'd like to open the floor for some questions. Apparently, our mic is not mobile, which we thought it was going to be. So has anybody got anything they'd like to say, either to, first of all, Dylan, and I should introduce Natasha, who's 3/4 of the way down the table there. She was a data and event coordinator for the PIT project, and so when you're asking questions, she may chime in with some detail.
Maybe you could repeat the questions once they're asked.
Yes, I will do that, sure.
Comment.
Sure.
I have a question about some of the statistics that Dylan was presenting. Were people allowed to choose multiples of the above, or was it like this is the main one, or how did that sort of break out? If they're saying 54%, is that 54% said this was the top one, or it was 3 of the above, or how did that go?
It depends on the question. So some questions asked only to pick one, and some picked more. So it was things around reasons for losing housing where they were contributing factors. Those sorts of questions tended to be, you could pick more than one. But yeah, if there were specific questions that you wanted to know about, I can tell you which ones were, what the actual questions were. Yeah. If it doesn't add up to 100%, then they had more than one choice.
Any other comments, questions? Jenny?
Dylan, maybe just a comment on the rigor of the study, the actual structure of the study for police. You know that it's not a survey monkey, it's actually a really well-studied tool.
Yeah, so we spent several months putting the survey together. So the actual survey document was, I should know this, how many questions there are. 22 questions. 14 of those questions are mandated by the federal government. So those questions are asked by all of the 61 communities who participated in the survey. Then there are a number of questions developed by the Canadian Observatory on Homelessness that you could choose from as optional questions, and we used a number of those questions. And then there were some questions that were just developed for the local community that reflected sort of the feedback we got from our community partners and what their priorities were and what sort of information they wanted to know about. So So for example, the barriers to accessing service was one of those questions. We also added answers to a lot of the questions. So things like the question around need for services, dental care, eye care, harm reduction were all answers that we added there to establish what people needed locally. So it was a pretty rigorous process in terms of developing the survey, and then we had all the volunteers went through a 2-hour training session, so they really understood the questions, what was being asked, the instructions for each question, so they knew whether people could give more than one answer or they only had to pick their top answer. So it was a rigorous development process and training process, so we're pretty satisfied with the quality of the data.
And a question to add to that is, over the next few years, I mean, after 3 years, you've got some pretty good trend data, but are the questionnaires exactly lined up so that you can get reliable data year over year? We haven't changed it too much?
Yeah, so the core questions are very similar. There were some minor tweaks that the Homelessness Partnership Strategy made. 2016 was the first year, so they got feedback from the various communities who participated in the survey, and they made a few adjustments to the core questions. They actually added quite a few core questions that were previously Homelessness Conservatory optional questions that are now mandatory questions. So our goal from here on out, part of the reason we spent the amount of time we spent this year developing the survey is because we don't want to change the survey next year. So going forward, this will be happening every 2 years. We want to keep the survey as close to what it looks like now so that we can have that comparable data as we're going forward. Yeah.
And did you, in the process, look at other communities in our region or even across the province? Like, how do we hold up against others?
That's a tricky one because we do have the data just came back from Kamloops and Kelowna, so we're looking at that. But because of Nelson's small size and the fact that we know this community really well, our numbers are high because we know where to find people as part of it. So per capita, our numbers are sometimes higher than other communities, but that reflects the fact that we know where to find, we know our population, and we know where to look. And we also have relationships with people. So people will talk to our volunteers because a lot of those volunteers are service providers who have existing relationships.
Yeah. But that said,
yeah.
Kelowna's survey came in with everybody in, including the sheltered population. It was about 300 people. So we are, and that's a population of what?
100,000, yeah.
Yeah, like edging, right? So we're really, our numbers are quite high for our population.
Yeah.
And I think it's totally based on zero vacancy. You know, there's a direct correlation between our zero vacancy rate and what people receive.
And I've said this before, sorry.
And this is a long, ongoing situation since around 2000. Nelson was in fact designated as a community where it was well known across the country, had a higher numbers per population than most communities. I mean, 61 is not that many when you look at across the country.
Yeah. And I think just jump in with one more thing about that. One of the really key things about Nelson participating in this is we're the smallest community that's participating in this. So our data is really important, and hopefully they will expand that and have other communities of our size. The only communities that come close to comparable size are in the north, so Whitehorse and Yellowknife. Whitehorse is about 25,000, so still quite a bit larger. But in BC, we are by far the smallest. The next biggest would be Kamloops and Kelowna, which are in the 120,000 range. So it's really, Nelson's data is really important because it's really, I think, people forget that there is urban homelessness, rural homelessness. People think that it's just an urban problem, but as we see, it's very much an urban problem, rural problem as well.
Yes?
Yeah, I think you kind of answered it. So Nelson, in terms of the East and West communities, Nelson's the only one participating in this?
Yes, correct. Yeah, the nearest community from here is Kelowna, is the closest one, yeah. Bernadette?
Sort of two questions. In all of this data gathering, what percentage are female? And is there a possibility that with these numbers and all this research being done, that maybe more resources can be put into the family as a whole to keep them together and work through these circumstances and help to change them?
Yeah.
Any consideration or thought?
So 38% of the survey respondents were female, compared to 54% male and 7% who identified as non-binary, genderqueer, or one of those categories. The second half of your question, could you just repeat that again for me, Bernadette?
It's about most of, like, children in care,
Right.
a lot about children in care. I haven't heard very much about keeping the families together so that children don't have to be in care, but they can be in care with the family, and everyone benefits as
Yeah.
a whole unit. That's what I'm asking.
Yeah.
Is there any desire or move forward in that direction? I guess I'm speaking to the statistics, how they're taking me, you know, there's numbers up to the zoo. And this isn't the only country, this isn't the only city, this isn't the only province. My concern is, what about the family as a whole? Because if there's problems with currently the situation, things are tough. What about parents? What about their parents? The environments they come. How do we break that cycle? That's what I'm asking. Is there any desire in these numbers, like with all the service providers here, for that?
Did anyone want to take this question?
Well, it's a good opportunity for me to say that. That, you know, our family counselor does parent-teen conflict resolution. We have always done that, but the uptake of that program is practically nil. So the problem is, as we've heard, is that often the horse is too far out of the barn to be brought back, and somehow or another we need to get, you know, kids and parents at an earlier stage moving towards some conflict resolution to maybe avert some of these matters. But by the time they hit MCFD and they're knocking on their door to go into care, it's kind of too late. So that's one option. I do think it's difficult. Sometimes there are irreconcilable differences that will keep parents and kids from ever staying together, which is why we need these other resources, but that is one service that exists.
At a political level, there is a greater will, recently I've noted, to family preservation.
Yeah.
We're hearing more and more comments, but it's a very long-term, expensive process.
If I can just add, one of the points that the report card makes is that more and more the sector is taking a preventative, like a public health approach to homelessness in terms of prevention. And so where can kind of interventions be made that can make a difference and, you know, maybe look at those kind of family situations that you're talking about, Bernadette. So, for example, involvement at the grade school levels and in terms of interventions there. If there are indicators that come up during grade school that can maybe lead to some interventions that can help families and can maybe withstand youth becoming homeless in these situations.
Yes, you have a question?
Yeah, two quick questions. One for Dylan. Do you have any idea how many seniors are included in the count?
Yes, but I don't have that information right before me, but I can get that to you. Yeah, we do have those numbers, yeah.
Second question is for Laura. So you said a really interesting thing, which that a lot of your clients don't necessarily identify as homeless. Do you think that is partially because they're unaware of services, or they're just maybe too young to be self-aware enough to know their situation should not be that way?
I think it's because they have a sort of stereotypical idea about what being homeless is, and it's that it's sleeping outside, it's camping, and I think for them, their situation is usually that they are sleeping in somebody's home, often not their own home, or on somebody's couch. So I think that it's more of a conceptual difference, I think, and perhaps also to feel like, you know, things aren't that bad. I think that's also the sense I got, because there was very much a defensiveness in the youth that I interviewed sometimes about saying like, no, I'm not homeless, that's not me, but I do sleep on people's couches from time to time, or like, you know that I'm trying to get out of the situation that I'm in, but I've kind of got it covered in some way.
Any further, okay, I'm going to start at least move across, okay? Sir?
Yes, I have more suggestion. I brought this up before. There are people out here, quite a few, who are renting way below market rate. And I had suggested once before to possibly give renters like that a homeowners grant or some reduction on their taxes, because we are taxed as if we are working for big profit when we are not. And with the new suggestions in granting, qualifying for homeowners grant, that is going to be, apparently depend on the income that is the general income of the homeowner who rents, or of the landlord who rents. I think with that system, one could put in an incentive for homeowners to rent at an affordable level rather than market level, which is simply not affordable, especially not here in Nelson, to give a grant like that, just a little incentive or thank you, or however you want to put it. I can't afford renting the 2 units that I have, which are part of my income, the pension, which the rest of it I would never live on. I can afford it because I don't own a car. If I would want to own a car and have that silly luxury, I couldn't do the way I rent it. I've talked with city councillors about this. They tell me, well, this is a provincial thing, our hands are tied. I've now just seen internationally how national governments have tied the hands of municipal governments, like in Italy, when Italy says rescue ships cannot dump their refugees in Italy anymore, and they will even be punished or confiscated and whatnot. And then come individual cities, their mayors, their councillors, they stand up against that big government, big extreme government, and say, look, this is enough. And they get their will. So refugees can land. I'm sure.
Thank you for that perspective, but we have some other
Yeah, I'm sure
comments?
our city councillors could the same with the province, especially now that we actually have a receptive government instead of that. And that is my suggestion. I would like to push there a little bit again, that we don't do this because it's a matter of political will and working together and taking a stand rather than to try to solve it with the status quo politically, because the status quo politically will never solve the homelessness problem.
Thank you. I think you're talking about many levels of government working
Exactly.
together in this complex.
Yeah, so this is for all of you. So I don't know, deliberate if you must answer it. But I'm wondering if you think do you think that some sort of policy, perhaps like rent control or increasing tenants' rights or something like that, would make any sort of meaningful change? Or is the direction just, helping this really move along, like as far as like reducing it? Is it more a question of maybe funding or education? Discuss.
I don't think there's any real silver bullet answer or solution to that problem. I think it's a systemic issue, i.e. like higher rents, lower wages, inflation. So I think we need to start with raising the minimum wage and wage equality all across the board, and then affordable rents and affordable housing, and landlords are willing to work with a lower rent population or a lower income population, and yeah, I think that it's a multifaceted answer and a multifaceted problem.